It has been said that the greatest thing in living lies not in never failing, but in rising every time that we fall. Ralph Waldo Emerson was correct in that statement because we're all going to fall. We're all going to make mistakes. And it's not if we fall, but it's rising up and improving, getting better. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how do we overcome failure. And I want to show you something about an individual that we all know. We're all very familiar with this individual. And I want to show you a little bit about his resume. This person started out at the age of 21, and he failed in business. He was defeated in a legislative race at the age of 22. He failed again at business at the age of 24. When he was 26 years old, he had to overcome the death of a sweetheart. No surprise, by the age of 27, he had a nervous breakdown. By the time he was 34, he lost a congressional race. He then lost a senatorial race at the age of 45. At the age of 47, he failed again at becoming the vice president. And then, at the age of 49, he lost another senatorial race. Now I want you to look at this man's resume. Failed, defeated, failed, dealing with a death, a nervous breakdown, lost, failed. Most people would look at this individual and think to themselves, this person is a failure. This person happens to be the 16th President of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln. And at the age of 52, he was elected president of our great nation. We're going to talk this evening about 3 steps. It's a 3-step process for overcoming failure. And it's clearly depicted in the diagram that's up on the board. The fact is that we try, and if we fail, we try again. And if we fail, we try again. And we just keep trying until we pass through success. And although that seems simplistic, a lot of people don't follow the pattern. They get to the fail part, and that's where they stay. And as Christians, that's not where we can be. So biblically, tonight we're going to look at the example of the life of Peter. And I'd like for us to consider just for a few minutes his life. You know, what's interesting about Peter is that I believe that he was probably one of the loudest and most spontaneous of all the disciples. He probably had the biggest personality in any room. So if you walked in, they're like, well, there's Peter. We can hear him. Do you know anyone like that? He joined James and John as one of the closest confidants of Christ. He had connections. He was the only disciple willing to get out and attempt to walk on water. That's Peter. Let's go get it. I can make this happen. He was the first to call Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. We see that in Matthew chapter 16. He was extremely confident. And I want to tell you something. The first time that my wife met me, you can ask her, what did you think of the first time you met Jarren? And she uses another word besides confident to describe how I was. She'd probably tell you that I was a little bit cocky. Let me tell you what, there's some great things about being confident in yourself. There's some positives, but I want to tell you there's some negatives. And Peter had to deal and overcome with the negatives of being extremely confident. In fact, he was so confident that when Jesus predicts that Peter's going to deny him, what does Peter do to the Son of God? He rebuffs him. He's like, I'm not going to do that. There's no way. You're talking about Peter. I wouldn't do that. Jesus? Unfortunately, just as Jesus predicted, and as we all know, Peter denies him 3 times. And when he realizes what he's done, he breaks down and he weeps bitterly. So let's read that. We find this in Luke chapter 22. So if you have your Bibles, turn over to Luke chapter 22. And this is what it says. Then they seized him and led him away, and bringing him in to the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. Peter wanted to see what was going on. He was still connected. Wanted to see what was going to happen to Jesus. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. And then a servant girl, seeing him, as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man is also with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, he had an hour to think about what he was doing, why he was there, what he was going to say. After about an interval of an hour, another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and he looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will have denied me 3 times. And he went out and he wept bitterly. We're not just talking about failure here, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about ultimate failure. He gave up Jesus. I mean, he's right there, right in front of him. And Peter denied him. What an insult. What a failure, right? Now, let's ask a few questions. Did Peter's failure exclude him from Christ's plans moving forward? Did Peter's failure put him in a situation where Peter was no longer needed in the kingdom? Was that it? Was he done? A has-been, a loser? Because he had made this ultimate failure mistake? Was he a forever failure? No. He was not. After the failure, Peter was the first of the 12 that Jesus appeared to. The first. Jesus went to Peter. We see that in Luke 24 as well as in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Jesus has a very touching moment with Peter on the Sea of Galilee. You see that in John chapter 21. The love that Christ had for Peter didn't waver. Peter goes on and becomes a leader of the disciples. He preaches the first gospel message. And through his words and his actions and his confidence, he was able to bring more than 3,000 people to the gospel. When you talk about overcoming failure from a biblical perspective, the Bible gives us a litany of examples of what God thinks about those that are trying. Yes, you may have failed, but you're still trying. Look what the psalmist says here. Though he fall, he shall not be cast headlong, for the Lord upholds his hand. He brings you up. The psalmist says the Lord is a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in the times of trouble. The psalmist goes on to say the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed spirit. Let me tell you what, is that the way you feel when you fell? I do. I mean, I feel crushed. I feel defeated. I'm down. The psalmist goes on and writes, "O Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You will strengthen their heart." That's what God does for those that keep on trying. You will incline your ear. Paul writes to the church at Corinth and says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed." They didn't give up. They kept going. They had issues. They had mistakes. They had failures. Kept going. Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." Now I want you to pay attention to the words we've been talking about. Uphold, stronghold, save. That can do. You can do all things. Strength. That's what God supplies to us to help us through our failures. So very quickly, we're going to look at a three-step process that can help us with failure. And once again, it goes through, you're going to try, and if you fail, you keep on trying. You fail, you try. You fail, you try. You keep on trying. The first step in this process to overcoming failure is this: examine the truth. Examining the truth is necessary, especially in a failure. Throughout my career, I've had to deal with fact versus fiction. Somebody would come and tell me something, and I'd have to think to myself, okay, is what you're telling me the truth? Is that fact, or is that fiction? Is it made up? And when I'm dealing with my own failures, I have to reflect on myself and say, Jarren, what did you do? What did you say? What were you thinking? What's the truth of the situation? Healing and recovery starts when the truth is exposed. This recognition, being able to examine and see the truth for what it is. The problem is we get caught up in lies and dishonesty, and it simply keeps us away from what the truth is. It keeps us in the dark. There's a great saying by Thomas Edison. Said, "I've not failed. I've found 10,000 ways that won't work." Have you ever found that you just keep making mistake after mistake after mistake? Well, you know what? You just keep on trying. Take a look back at Luke chapter 22. Look what Peter does. He goes back and he reflects on the truth of the situation and what happened. Peter remembered. He recognized. He examined the reality of the situation. And in remembering and examining the truth, he had some options. Peter could have just simply denied it. You know, I was the only disciple there. No one else was there. I can just act like that never happened. He could have, while examining the truth, just walked away from all of it and said, you know what? They just nailed Jesus to the cross. I'm out. I don't want any part of this. Or you can do what Peter did, and he looked back at the situation. He remembered what the words of the Lord was. He looked at the truth of the situation, and he accepted the situation. He took ownership, and he recognized that he had made a mistake. He reflected on what happened and why it happened. Peter had to see the truth of what happened. Lamentations chapter 3, verse 40 says this: "Let us test and examine our ways and return to the Lord." Sometimes that's what we got to do. We got to look in the mirror at ourselves and say, am I doing the right things? Am I saying the right things? Am I thinking the right things? We're pretty good at examining other people, but sometimes we struggle at examining what? Ourselves. We got to see the truth for what it is. In 2 Corinthians chapter 13, it says this. Paul says, look, examine yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror. Examine yourself to see whether you're in your faith. Test yourself. Or do you not realize this about yourself, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the test? It's about recognizing the truth. Second step in this process for overcoming failure is feeling the pain. We don't like to do this. Don't like to own up to what we've done, what we've caused, the words that we use, the actions that we were involved with. What generally ends up happening is that after a failure occurs, a lot of people just immediately get into this mode of getting as far away from the pain as possible. In fact, they may even deny that they did anything. I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have done that. That wasn't me. If you're like me in any way, I don't like pain. I don't like to be in situations that are painful unless I just have to be. I tend to avoid it, especially when I'm looking at myself and recognizing things that I've said or done that either hurt myself or hurt other people. And owning up to that can be difficult. Dealing with pain is just part of the healing process. Look what happens in Luke chapter 22 and verse 62. What did Peter do? He went out and he wept bitterly. Why? Do you think he recognized what he had done? Now let's ask a few questions here. Do you think that Peter only thought about the events of this night just that one night? He never thought about that ever again. Do you think that's true? Is it possible that the feelings of failure that Peter had on that night motivated him moving forward to be stronger and more courageous? Is it possible that he thought about that night when he stood up in front of all those people and he began to preach about Jesus? You think he recognized the pain that he inflicted? Is it possible that Peter determined in himself, you know what, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to be better. When I get in that situation, I'm going to recognize my own shortcomings and I'm going to improve. Let's quickly look at another character that we read about in the Old Testament. It's King David. And we all know the faults of King David, but listen to his words as he writes here in Psalms chapter 51. Listen what he says to God. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out what? My transgressions. You think he felt bad about it? I think he did. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, cleanse me from my sins, for I know my transgressions. I made mistakes, God, and I'm sorry. My sin is ever before me. Was he forgiven? Yeah, he's forgiven. Did he have to deal with the consequences of his failures? Yes. Was it painful for him? Yes. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Do what? Purge me. Make me better, God. Make me better. And I shall be clean. Wash me, and I will wither whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my what? From my sins. Blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. David had to deal with the pain of the mistakes that he's made, but he owned up to it, and it made him better. My coach used to say to me, Garrett, pain is weakness leaving the body. I had no idea what that meant. But I can tell you this, The pain of failure can help you be stronger, better, more courageous, more determined. When you recognize in yourself that I need help, I need to improve. Three-step process. This is the third step. This process of overcoming failure is you got to be willing to change. You got to be willing to change. Life is about continual improvement. Rob Mullins is not the man he was 20 years ago. Jarren is not the same man he was 30 years ago. I hope I'm better. I know Rob is. It's about continual improvement. Based on Luke chapter 22 and a lot of other verses in the Scriptures, what type of personality traits do you think that Peter had to overcome and improve upon? Now you think about Peter for a second. What type of personality traits do you think that he had to work on a daily basis? Do you think he had to work on his rash words? Yeah, I think so. Do you think that he had to slow down because he was quick to react without thinking? You know anybody like that? You think he had issues with anger? This concept that I'm going to be better today than I was yesterday, and I'm going to improve upon today, tomorrow. It's continual improvement. And that's what God expects for us, continual improvement. Failure isn't fatal, but failure to change might be. The greatest coach that ever lived, John Wooden. Love that. Listen, if you fail to change, you're going to be a failure. You can't stay there. You got to press on. You got to be better. Listen to what Peter himself says about this. Peter writes in 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 13, he says this: Therefore, preparing your minds for action. Be sober-minded. Set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the salvation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed. Don't be that old person. You got to take that old person and put that old person away to the passions of your former ignorance. Don't be that person. But as he who calls you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. This whole idea of preparing, it's a willingness to change. A willingness to change with a focus on application. It's not this idea of, hey, I think I'm going to get better. It's, you know what? Here are the things I need to do to get better. I'm going to set out some things that I'm going to recognize when I get in situations that I'm going to close my mouth. I'm not going to get upset the first time I hear something. And I'm going to work on that. I'm going to have that in front of me all the time. I'm going to be prepared. This idea of preparing your mind for action, the actual translation here is to gird up your loins. If you're a Andy Griffith fan like I am, it's getting your belt all up. And Barney Fife, let me tell you what they did. They would get their clothes and they'd put it in their belt when they were getting prepared to work. And Peter's using that as an analogy to say, listen, every day you got to get in there, you got to get ready for action for yourself. Prepare yourself for yourself. That's what Peter's saying. Have you ever said something and you're like, I cannot believe it. I just said that. Because I wasn't prepared. I didn't realize what I was about to walk into. Instead of being in the right mind, I just reacted. Have you ever done that? I have. Peter's urging us, look, you have to clear your mind. And you got to be ready for whatever comes at you each and every day. When it comes to preparation, unfortunately, people fall into like one of three categories, right? The first one is they don't prepare at all. It's all good. Whatever happens, I'm just going to kind of react to it. No preparation. Second group of people think about being prepared, but they don't do anything. They pay a little bit of attention. That's not what Peter tells us. Peter says, look, you have got to be prepared. You got to gird up your loins. You got to be ready for action every day. Going on the alert with our thoughts and with the intention of being better, applying the knowledge, taking action. Paul writes this to the church at Ephesus and says this, put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. What do you know what Paul's talking about? He's talking about change. Changing yourself. It takes action. You're putting off the old, putting on the new. And that starts with a willingness to change. And as Christians, we've got to have that willingness. We've got to have that willingness to change. Colossians 3, 8 through verse 10 says this, but now you must put them all away. You got to put away what? Well, you got to put away anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. Whew. What? You mean it matters what I say? It matters what you say. I gotta watch my words. You got to watch your words. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. Paul says, look, you got to be willing to change. So here's the formula. That formula starts with willingness, preparation, and action. That's how you gain change. I've got to have a willingness to do this. I've got to be prepared every day to do this. And I'm going to take action when that opportunity arises. So we talked about a three-step process. It's examining the truth, it's feeling the pain, and a willingness to change. Winston Churchill said this. He said, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. Sometimes you just got to be courageous and say, you know what? I'm tired of failing. I'm going to do better. I'm going to be committed to being a better person. You think Peter did that? Yeah, the rest of his life. He worked every day to be a little better than he was the day before and improving upon that the next day. Remember this, it always starts with the truth. Always. John 8:32 says this, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth, the gospel, the truth about yourself. If you never examine the truth about who you are, examine the truth of the gospel, then it would be extremely difficult for you to feel the pain and make the changes that you need to make in your life. Right? I think so. We're going to end with a quote from Abraham Lincoln, the one that we looked at as someone who had all these failures in his life. And he said this, my greatest concern is not whether you failed, but whether you're content with your failure. As Christians, we can't be content with failure. We keep on pushing. We prepare. We determine. We apply ourselves. We work to be better people, better Christians that God expects us to be. If you've never done that, you've never put on Christ, and you're just kind of circling in your failures and in your sin, that's no way to live. If you're a Christian and you've had some issues and you need help, that's what the church is all about. That's why the church is here. That's why God gave us each other, to help us. If there's anything that we can do, we encourage you as we stand and sing.